Now, before I conclude this very basic starting module with REST, let me show you something important which you need to configure on any REST API you're building, which will not only be used by tools like this one or by code that runs on the same server. And I can demonstrate what I mean by going to CodePen. In case you don't know CodePen, it's basically a service which you can use for free to write simple HTML, JavaScript, and CSS snippets or projects. You can share them easily with other people, and we can simulate a very simple front-end application here. We can create a new pen for that, and here you can write, as you see, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. Now, I'll not need CSS because I want to keep it simple. And this is a great playground here now because we can simulate a front-end app here. Because a front-end app, if it is a single-page app, will only use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript because we don't write any server-side code in there, right? So in here, we might have a normal button. A button we use to send a request to the backend. Here we could get our posts, and I'll copy that button and also duplicate it to create a post. And this is, of course, just a very basic dummy code. We'll build a different project for the rest of this course. But now I have these two buttons here in my pen, as you can see. Now let's add some JavaScript code to do something with them. And for that, I'll need to get access to these buttons. So I'll give the first one an ID of get and the second one an ID of post, just to keep this really simple. So my get button can be accessed with document, get element by ID, and then it's get. And the second button, of course, is the same with post. So I'll name it post button, and I'm looking for the element with the ID post. So I just want to get access to them so that I can register a listener. So on the get button, I can add an event listener for the click event that should in the end make a request to my backend. So I'll define an anonymous arrow function here, and in there I'll use the fetch API, which is built into modern browsers with the fetch keyword, where I can define a URL to which I want to send a HTTP request. And in my case, that is HTTP localhost 8080/feed/posts. Remember, that is simply this route I defined here. So I want to send a request to that route or to that endpoint, as you learned. By default, this is a GET request when using the fetch method. And then we might have either a success case, which we can handle in the then block, or we have an error. If we have an error, I'll just log my error here. In the then block, we actually get back a response object where we still need to wait for the body to complete because it will be streamed in. So with REST JSON, we can wait for this and then automatically convert it to JSON content or to a JavaScript object. And then we chain another then block where we will have that JavaScript object because, as I mentioned on the slides, JSON can be converted really well to JavaScript, and the JSON method does just that, the conversion, and it waits for the body to be streamed in. And then I can console log my response data here. Now let's open up the developer tools, clear these existing errors here, which were only created whilst I was still typing. And you don't need to save anything, it saves automatically, and click Get Posts. And you should get a no access control allow origin header is present error. This is an error you see a lot when building modern web applications, modern single page applications. And it often leads to a lot of confusion. This error is also called a CORS error, and you see the word CORS down there. Now, what is CORS and what's causing it, and most importantly, how can we solve it? CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing, and by default, this is not allowed by browsers. So if we have our client in a server, and they run on the same domain, and the domain could be localhost 3000, important, the port is part of the domain. If they run on the same server, we can send requests and responses as we want to without issues. And that is why we had no issue before in the course. We rendered our HTML files on the server, and therefore they were served by the same server as you sent your requests to. So we never had any issues. So this works. However, if client and server run on different domains, like the client on localhost 4000, which is a different domain than 3000, then we'll have issues. And of course, in production, you would run on myapp.com and let's say myapi.com. If you send requests and responses here, you get problems. You get a CORS error because it's a security mechanism provided by the browser that you can't share resources across domains, across servers, across origins, as it's called here. However, we can override this. Because this mechanism makes sense for some applications, for REST APIs, it typically does not. We want to allow our server to share its data. We want to offer data from our server to different clients. And these clients will often not be served by the same server as our API runs on. Take Google Maps. You're not running your app on Google servers. Still, you can access it. And the same is true for your own API. And even if you build both the frontend and the backend, you will often serve the two ends from different servers because you can choose a server for the frontend that's optimized for frontend code that really serves that really well, and you serve your server-side code, your node code, from a different server. So you will have different domains, different addresses there too. And therefore, we need to solve such a CORS error, or we need to tell the browser here, which runs on CodePen in this case here, we need to tell that browser that it may accept the response sent by our server. And to tell the browser, we have to change something on the server. And this is a common gotcha. A lot of people see that error and want to solve it in their browser-side JavaScript code. You just can't. You can only solve that on the server. So if we go back to our server-side code, we just need to set some special headers. We want to set these headers on any response that leaves our server. So the app.js file and a general middleware is a great place. So here, before I forward the request to my routes, where I will ultimately send the response, I want to add headers to any response. So I'll set up a general middleware in app.js, which gets my request response next function. And there, with set header, we can conveniently add a header to the response. We don't send the response yet. Set header does not send it. JSON does, rendered it, but set header does not. Set header will only modify it and add a new header. And now there are a couple of headers we need to set. The first one is the access, control, allow, origin, all separated with dashes. So access dash, control dash, allow dash, origin. That is the first header we need to set, and we want to set it to all the URLs, all the domains that should be able to access our server. So we could add codepen.io here, but often you will just set this to star, to a wildcard that allows access to from any client. You could lock it down to specific domains though, if you wanted to. If you have multiple domains, you can separate them with commas, but I will go with the wildcard. I will also set another header, and that is the access dash control dash allow dash methods header. Here we allowed specific origins to access our content, our data. Now we allow these origins to use specific HTTP methods. Because by just unlocking the origins, it would still not work. We also need to tell the clients, the origins, which methods are allowed. And there you can allow get, post, put, patch, delete. You don't have to allow them all. You can only allow what you want to be usable from outside. Now there's one last header I want to set, or I should set, and that is access dash, control dash, allow dash. And now I'm talking about the headers our clients might set on their requests. There, you could also use a wildcard, or you can specify specific headers. Now, there are some default headers which are always allowed, but you especially want to add the content dash type header and the authorization header, so that your clients can send requests that hold extra authorization data in the header, which we'll need later, and that also define the content type of the request. And that will become important soon too. With that added, we need to do one last thing. We need to call next so that the request can now continue and can be handled by our routes. But now every response that we send will have these headers. And therefore, if we save our server-side code and we restart the server therefore, and we go back to CodePen, if I clear these errors and I click Get Posts again, now it just works, as you can see, because now we set the appropriate CORS headers on the server.